So what if I told you that the people who have contributed over $14 billion to save American wildlife,
Which is a massive number, by the way.
right, a staggering amount of money, but what if I told you those exact same people are the ones actively shooting at that wildlife?
Yeah, it really sounds like a complete paradox, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, it's
Ah.
like if a forest is burning down, you don't hand a fire hose to the person holding the matches.
Right, exactly. You would naturally assume that the people, harvesting an animal population would be its biggest threat. But historically and financially, they've actually been its greatest lifeline.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a really fascinating dynamic today. Our mission is to basically map out the historical and the financial relationship between hunters and wildlife conservation in the U.S.
Yeah, and all the insights we're exploring today come directly from an official U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service article. It's titled Hunters as Conservationists.
And we should say right up front, this isn't just a niche topic for people who own, like, a camouflage jacket or a hunting rifle.
Oh, absolutely not.
Hmm.
We're going to look at the mechanics of a multi-billion-dollar funding engine that impacts, well, every single listener.
Right.
Like whether you're an avid outdoorsman or a weekend hiker, or honestly just someone who likes seeing a flock of birds fly over your house, the landscape you are enjoying was largely bought and paid for by a very specific group of people.
It's really wild to think about. But to understand how this hidden financial engine actually works, we kind of need to go back to the breaking point, right? Like, the moment America realized its wildlife wasn't just this infinite resource.
Yeah, we have to look at the early 1900s, which it's difficult for us to comprehend today because hunting is so highly regulated now. But back then, it was an era of absolute ecological devastation.
Because people were just taking whatever they wanted.
Exactly. Unchecked market hunting. The source article points to a few really stark historical realities. And the most famous one, of course, is the actual extinction of the passenger pigeon.
Which, wait, that wasn't just some rare bird, right? I mean,
Yeah.
from what I understand, they used to literally blacken the skies for days when they migrated.
Billions of them.
Uh,
Just billions. And they are completely gone, wiped out by habitat destruction and just relentless commercial slaughter.
wow.
And right alongside that, you had the near elimination of the American bison, plus the absolute decimation of dozens of migratory bird species.
I guess the prevailing assumption during westward expansion was just that the American wilderness was so incredibly vast, like human beings could never possibly put a dent in it.
Yeah, they thought it was limitless, but the passenger pigeon proved that theory fatally wrong.
Right. And this is where Theodore Roosevelt enters the narrative. So he was the 26th president, he founded the National Wildlife Refuge System, and crucially for this topic, he was a massive, unapologetic hunter.
He really was.
Yeah.
And he was on the front lines of this crisis. He saw the decimation of the big game herds in the West with his own eyes.
Oh, yeah.
And he formulated this philosophy that really set the stage for everything we're going to talk about today. The Fish and Wildlife Service highlights a specific quote from Roosevelt where he's arguing against the anti-hunting sentiment of his day.
Which definitely existed back then, too.
Oh, for sure. He stated that the excellent people who protest against all hunting and consider sportsmen as enemies of wildlife are ignorant of the fact that in reality the genuine sportsman is by all odds the most important factor in keeping the larger and more valuable wild creatures from total extermination.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Because to a modern listener, this sounds totally counterintuitive, like an arsonist funding the fire department.
Right.
And I have to ask, was that actually true at the time? Or was Roosevelt just a wealthy, powerful guy trying to politically protect his favorite weekend hobby? Because saying hunters are the most important factor in saving animals sounds incredibly self-serving, especially coming from a guy famous for going on massive hunting safaris.
It's completely fair to view that with skepticism. Totally fair. But Roosevelt was drawing a very deliberate line in the sand between what he called a market hunter.
So someone slaughtering animals just for commercial profit?
Exactly. Indiscriminate killing for money. He separated them from the genuine sportsman. His argument was definitely rooted in self-interest, but it was a self-interest that aligned perfectly with conservation.
I see.
He realized that if the people who valued the hunt the most didn't actively step up to protect the habitats and actually regulate the harvest, the animals would just disappear forever.
And the sport would die with them.
Exactly. It was a forced evolution from just unchecked consumption to managed stewardship. How did this realization actually translate into real-world action, though?
Right, rather than just creating like a private hunting club for the elite. Because if you want to keep hunting, you have to make sure there's something left to hunt. But why didn't wealthy politicians just buy up all the remaining pristine land, fence it off, and hoard the elk for themselves?
That is the million-dollar question. Because historically, that's exactly what happened in a lot of other parts of the world.
Like in Europe?
Yeah, in Europe, wildlife was mostly the property of the nobility. But the shift in America went in the exact opposite direction. Instead of privatizing nature, the hunting and angling communities pushed to democratize it.
Which is pretty radical for the time.
Very. And that push crystallized into what we now call the North American model of wildlife conservation.
So it's basically like a public library of nature.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, think about it. Instead of a king or a wealthy landowner owning all the books, or in this case the animals, every single citizen holds a library card. You, me, the listener, we all have equal ownership of the wildlife in this country.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize the legal framework. It established this shared democratic heritage.
But wait, if everyone owns the library, who is actually paying to keep the lights on and the shelves stocked? Because declaring that wildlife belongs to everyone is a beautiful philosophical sentiment, but philosophy doesn't buy acres of wetlands.
It really doesn't.
And it doesn't pay for wildlife biologists.
What's fascinating here is that the architects of this model recognize that friction immediately. Democratizing wildlife directly necessitated a financial mechanism to actually manage it.
You can't separate the two.
No, you cannot divorce the philosophy from the literal hard dollar cost of conservation. They realized they needed a reliable, recurring stream of revenue.
And this brings us out of the realm of philosophy and into the first major financial tool mentioned in our sources, the duck stamp.
Yes, formerly known as the Federal Migratory Bird Hunting and Conservation Stamp.
Right, but for the sake of everyone's sanity, we'll just stick with duck stamp.
Good call.
So this is a literal physical piece of paper, but the Fish and Wildlife Service describes it as one of the most successful conservation tools ever created. How does a piece of paper actually generate meaningful habitat protection?
So it functions as a mandatory user fee. The duck stamp was created in 1934, and the rule is really simple. If you are over the age of 16 and you want to hunt waterfowl, so ducks, geese, swans, you are legally required to purchase this stamp and carry it with you.
So it's not a suggestion or like a voluntary donation at the cash register.
Not at all. It is a strict prerequisite for participating in the hunt.
What I find so striking about this is the historical context. I mean, 1934 is the height of the Great Depression. It's the absolute misery of the Dust Bowl.
Yeah, the worst possible time economically.
Right. Wetlands across the country were literally drying up or being drained for agriculture. So you have this coalition of hunters lobbying the federal government to impose a mandatory fee on them during the worst economic crisis in American history.
They did it because the alternative was losing the waterfowl populations entirely. Yeah, habitat was just vanishing. But the true genius of the duck stamp isn't just that it raises money, it's what actually happens to the money after it's collected.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when you hear about any government program, your first thought is usually about administrative overhead.
Well, always. Bureaucracy, red tape, salaries.
Exactly. But the duck stamp has this staggering efficiency metric. According to the source, for every single dollar spent on a duck stamp, 98 cents go directly to purchasing vital habitat or acquiring conservation easements within the National Wildlife Refuge System.
Yeah, a 98% efficiency rate is almost unheard of in government. That money is legally ring-fenced. It cannot be siphoned off for general government spending. It goes straight into the dirt.
Let's clarify one of those terms for the listener, actually. What exactly is a conservation easement? I know what buying land means, but how does an easement work?
Sure. So a conservation easement is essentially renting the ecological value of the land without taking away the actual ownership.
Okay, how so?
Well, the government uses duck stamp funds to pay a private landowner, like, say, a farmer who owns a massive flooded field, a lump sum of money. In exchange, that farmer agrees to a legally binding contract that says they will never pave over, develop, or permanently drain that wetland.
Oh, that's smart. So the farmer still owns the property.
Exactly. They can still farm around it, but the habitat is permanently protected for the birds.
And the scale of this purchasing power is massive. The article notes that since 1934, duck stamp funds have conserved almost 6 million acres of habitat.
Just try to visualize 6 million acres. I mean, it is a monumental swath of landscape that has been shielded from concrete and development forever.
And this is where the listener really needs to connect the dots. If you're just a casual birdwatcher or a hiker enjoying these nearly 6 million acres, aren't you essentially benefiting from a massive hunter-funded real estate purchase?
Without question. You are walking on ground that was paid for by waterfowlers?
Wow.
Because once that wetland is purchased or placed under an easement, it doesn't just serve the ducks. It becomes a vital, thriving ecosystem for everything.
Right, nature doesn't operate in silos.
Exactly. It filters local drinking water, it provides natural flood control for downstream towns, and it
Yeah.
creates a sanctuary for hundreds of species that are never hunted. Songbirds, amphibians, native plants, endangered insects.
So the duck hunters bought the stamp, but the entire public reaps the ecological dividend.
Precisely.
It's an incredibly elegant solution. But there is a glaring limitation here, isn't there? The duck stamp works beautifully if you're a mallard duck or a blue heron. But if you're a white-tailed deer or a wild turkey or a black bear living in a hardwood forest, well, a wetland stamp doesn't really help you.
No, it doesn't.
How did the government solve the funding problem for the rest of the continent's wildlife?
You've hit on the exact friction point they faced just a few years later. The duck stamp is a surgical tool designed specifically for migratory birds. But to truly fulfill the North American model and manage all wildlife across 50 states, you cannot rely on waterfowl hunters alone.
You need something bigger.
Yeah, state agencies needed a systemic, heavy-duty financial engine.
Which brings us to a piece of legislation that completely revolutionized how we pay for nature in America. The Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act, passed in 1937.
Right, universally known in conservation circles as the Pittman-Robertson Act. If the duck stamp was the proof of concept, Pittman-Robertson is the industrial machinery that built modern wildlife management.
But the mechanics of this machinery are totally different, right? Because I can't go to the post office and buy a Pittman-Robertson stamp.
No, you can't.
How does this actually generate revenue?
It utilizes an excise tax, specifically an excise tax levied on firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment.
Wait, how does an excise tax actually work in practice? Does the cashier tack it on at the register when someone buys a box of shotgun shells?
No, the consumer never actually sees it on their receipt. An excise tax is baked into the cost of the good at the manufacturer level.
Oh, I see.
So when a company manufactures and sells a rifle or a box of ammunition, a percentage of that wholesale price, typically around 10 to 11%, is collected by the federal government before the product ever even reaches the retail shelf.
So what does this all mean? It's basically a hidden nature tax built directly into the gear.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like a highway toll that's baked directly into the price of your car tires. You don't ever see a toll booth, you don't throw quarties into a basket, but every single time you drive, you are quietly paying to pave the road beneath you.
That is a perfect analogy. It is a hidden, continuous investment. And again, look at the timeline here. This was passed in 1937. Still the Great Depression.
Right.
You got the firearms industry and hunting advocacy groups actively lobbying Congress to place a tax on their own products during an era when nobody had spare cash.
Because they knew what was at stake.
Exactly. They knew that if state agencies didn't have the funds to restore habitats and enforce game laws, the wildlife would vanish, and the hunting industry would just collapse with it.
So the federal government is collecting this hidden tire toll, this excise tax, from every bullet and bow sold. Where does the money actually go?
The funds are pooled by the federal government and then apportioned directly back to state fish and wildlife agencies. It is legally mandated funding that the states use for their core operations.
Okay, so what do they spend it on?
Well, the article specifically lists that this money is used for wildlife conservation projects, hunter education programs, and increasing outdoor recreation access.
But what does a conservation project actually look like on the ground? I mean, how does money from a box of ammunition turn into a living animal?
It creates this biological and financial flywheel effect. State agencies use this Pittman-Robertson money to hire wildlife biologists.
Okay.
Those biologists conduct population surveys to see how many deer or turkeys are in a forest. The state uses the funds to buy new public land or to conduct controlled burns that rejuvenate the forest floor, which creates better food sources.
And better food and protected land means the animal populations boom.
Exactly. And when the populations boom, hunting is fantastic, which means more people buy hunting gear and licenses.
And when they buy more gear, they generate more excise tax, which goes right back to the state to buy more land. It's a self-sustaining loop.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, It's the ultimate application of a user pays public benefits model.
It really is.
And the sheer scale of the revenue this loop has generated is just staggering. The Fish and Wildlife Service states that since 1937, sportsmen and women have contributed more than $14 billion to conservation through this act alone.
$14 billion. I mean, it's hard to even conceptualize that amount of money being quietly funneled into forests and prairies over the last 90 years.
It's a massive investment.
And the source makes it very clear what that $14 billion achieved. It fueled the recovery of species like white-tailed deer and wild turkeys, which, we should probably note, were practically wiped out in many parts of the country before this funding kicked in.
Yeah, the recovery of those game species is one of the greatest conservation success stories in global history. But honestly, the most crucial detail in the article, the detail that really cements Roosevelt's original claim, is that Pittman-Robertson funds have also driven the recovery of countless non-game species.
The irony there is amazing. Buying a box of ammunition actively builds a home for a non-game animal.
Exactly. Because the ecosystem doesn't discriminate based on the funding source.
Right.
When a state biologist uses Pittman-Robertson money to protect a massive stretch of forest because they want to, say, support the elk population, they are simultaneously protecting their habitat for woodpeckers, for foxes, for monarch butterflies, and for native ferns.
Everything benefits.
Yeah, the hunter's purchase paid for the management, but the umbrella of protection covers everything living in that forest.
Which brings us right back to our library analogy from earlier. The hunters and the target shooters are the ones paying the late fees, funding the new additions, fixing the roof. But the doors of the library are thrown wide open for anyone who wants to come in and read.
I love that.
A casual hiker who has never touched a firearm is enjoying a trail managed by an agency funded by ammunition sales.
It is a profoundly symbiotic relationship. The hunters rely on the state agencies to scientifically manage the population so the sport can continue, but the state agencies desperately rely on the hunters to keep buying the gear.
Because without that excise tax, the agencies would go bankrupt.
Yeah, the lights in the library would turn off.
It really reframes the entire paradox we started with. The idea that the people harvesting the wildlife are the ones saving it doesn't seem like a contradiction anymore.
Not at all.
When you dig into the 98-cent efficiency of the duck stamp and you trace the $14 billion flywheel of the Pittman-Robertson Act, it looks less like irony and more like one of the most brilliantly engineered public funding models in American history.
It truly is. It was a system born entirely out of panic and crisis, but it was sustained by the literal financial skin in the game of the people who interact with the resource the most.
So, to bring it all together for you listening, the next time you're kayaking through a quiet wetland, where you see a wild turkey cross a rural road, or you're just taking in the view from a protected public ridge, just pause for a second.
Yeah, take a look around.
Realize that those animals and the ground they stand on are largely there because of a century-old $14 billion partnership with the hunting community. It is a legacy hidden right in plain sight.
It is a remarkable legacy. But understanding how this engine works also forces us to confront a very real, very pressing question about the future.
Oh.
Yeah, something I think the listeners should really mull over as they digest all this.
That's the question.
Well, we just established that this entire $14 billion conservation machine and the survival of both game and non-game species is almost entirely reliant on a hidden tax on hunting equipment and the mandatory sale of hunting licenses.
Right. The user pays.
Exactly. So, what happens to the future of American wildlife conservation if the number of active hunters drastically declines in the decades to come?
Oh.
Demographics are changing. If the people who have historically paid the hidden toll to pave the road stop driving, who is going to step up and pay to keep the public library of nature open?
Wow. That is the $14 billion question right there. A completely different kind of crisis on the horizon.
It is the next great challenge for the North American model.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It has been a truly eye-opening journey through the history, the biology, and the hidden financial mechanics of our wild spaces. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and we will see you on the next deep dive.